continue that. Do you remember
Right.
that?
I vaguely remember, but I don't know what I was going to say at that moment. Um,
You were about to get into the different kinds of methods you used for doing like spontaneous name amnesia casually with people,
okay, yeah,
just trying to play with it and the kind of results you got.
okay. We'll say a little something about that. Just to pull a broader frame out around that for people watching this, because I'm aware in touching on that topic, even though it's a topic that is people don't realize it necessarily. It can seem like a really specialist thing. So, well, why would you want to do that? Why would you go out do this name amnesia thing? And for me, when I was doing that stuff, I was doing it within the context of looking to understand how language and communication moves minds and how we make up our experience and how those two things come together, or those two sides. You've got language and communication, and then we've got the fact that people make up their experience, and how do we use that language and communication to move minds. I've sort of said a number of times recently, it's just a heuristic that NLP, neuro linguistic programming, is 50% epistemology and 50% cybernetic communication, right? Now, let me just say what I mean by that quickly, and then we'll look at
Please do.
name amnesias as an example. So, epistemology, it's a term from philosophy, and it's generally originally was the study or the philosophical investigation into what we can know. This is how it starts out, right? Epistemology is what can we absolutely know that we know, right? How do we find truth? And we're looking for certainty in that truth, right? Now, in the sort of Western philosophical tradition, as the sort of 18th century progressed and then as the 19th century progressed into the 20th century, it became clearer and clearer and clearer that basically we don't really get to absolutely, there's problems with truth. It's very difficult to say anything that is absolutely true and is utterly unproblematic. There's a gap between our knowing of things and the things we're trying to know.
Hmm.
And they're always, likely as not, always will be. People have been around and around this. Now, the only question left is, well, is there anything out there to know, or is it just the stuff our mind makes up? Right now, my personal bet is there is stuff out there to know. We don't get to know it directly. We get to get up close to it. But here's the other thing about uh, epistemology or sense making, you could call it. Because once you accept that you don't get to know anything, well, that's not to say that you don't get to make sense of things, right? That's a slightly
Hmm.
different, to say this is absolute truth is different from this is a way of thinking about things that helps we make sense of things, right? So, in a sense, we kind of move on from epistemology to sense making. The reason I use the term epistemology there is because Gregory Bateson, who was a big influence on NLP, used the term epistemology, but in an evolved sense. So, much more like sense making. He was interested in how people make sense, the sense that people make, right? And there's an influence here in hypnosis, in um, NLP from general semantics, Alfred Korzybski's general semantics, from which the phrase the map is not the territory comes about. So our map is the sense that we make of something. Now, here's the thing about the sense that we make of something. That's not an intellectual thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what I mean by that is when people make sense of something, they do it outside of consciousness and they meet the world through that sense they make, and that sense they make shapes their experience of it. So that's half of NLP. The other half is cybernetic communication, running communication feedback loops between you and other people to move their mind in different directions. When you combine these two things, you're moving somebody's mind to make a different sense of this moment. And when they make a different sense of this moment, they experience this moment very differently. Now, there's a couple of things you could do with this. You could either have um, a sort of instrumental view of it, which is, i.e., I want to move this person's mind in this way to get this particular outcome. Right? So you're creating shifts in the mind as a means to an end. And this is the side of NLP that salespeople are very interested in, and probably politicians and these sorts of things. People who are basically trying to achieve an end through certain means, through communications means. And then there's another way you can use this, which is to help somebody enrich their own map of the world. There's not an end. It's not, I want to get this person to do this or I want to get this person to experience this. It's, I want to help this person make fresh new sense that serves them better. Right. Or maybe we want to co create fresh new sense about a certain situation that helps us resolve certain problems. Right. So there's two ways of approaching this. Now, I have a particular interest in communication and what communication can do, how we can create with it, how we can co-create with it, but also how we can move people's minds. So I was doing a lot of exploration around this, and I had a particular interest in hypnosis and hypnotic language. And hypnosis is hypnotic language and communication. There, in my view, there is nothing to it beyond that. It's not that there's hypnotic language and communication that puts somebody into a special state called hypnosis. There's no special state called hypnosis. There's just hypnotic language and communication. So I'm curious as to what can be done with this. And I did a lot of experiments with it. And the name amnesia thing, this was just an experiment. It's just to see what might happen, what might be possible. How can we do this? How can we be strategic in our communication? Now, this isn't this is an example of what I was calling instrumental influence, so to speak, right? It's that we want to create a specific outcome, which is somebody
Mhm.
losing their name. All right. Now, going out and playing around with this, it doesn't really have function in the world. It's not a thing that has particularly any value in and of itself. I don't think you could find some creative applications in change work, this kind of thing. And I have found creative applications in change work. But by and large, the reason for doing it is to sharpen communication skills, influence skills, particularly at that level, not intellectual influence skills, but experiential influence skills. Right? You want to transform someone's experience. So there's a lot to be learned from this. If you are in the business of moving minds, whatever your profession might be, whatever it is that you're looking to create in the world, this can be interesting stuff to explore. But the vast majority of people don't explore it because it seems to be too far off piste. However, we're going to explore it here for the curious. Does that make sense? What I just said?
Yes, yes. I was expecting you to close the loop on in terms of you were saying about sense making isn't done something that is it's not done consciously or rather rationally. It's something that you do in a sense automatically.
Yeah,
I was
it's
curious.
entirely unconscious.
I was curious, and how, how would you explain the times when we do have this? Okay, the sense making is done automatically, but then in the end, we do end up coming with some sort of perceived rational explanation for how we made sense of whatever it was and the way we made sense of it.
Right.
Is
I
that
mean,
something that happens after the fact then?
this is what's often called a post hoc rationalization or a backwards rationalization. There's interesting experiments that show that the point our consciousness thinks that it's involved and thinks it's initiating things and thinks it's making decisions, the decision it thinks it's making has already passed. You know
I've
about
seen
that?
it, this is an experiment with the clickers
Yeah,
choose either clicker left or right, but choose it when you think you've made a decision.
yeah.
And they
Click
found that
as
you,
yeah, click as soon as you know you're gonna. As soon as you make the decision, click. No hesitation.
yeah,
But the people watching the brain scans know way before that click happens what a person's going to do.
something like even seconds, up to 6 or 7 seconds ahead of
Right.
the event.
So our consciousness isn't there at the front end doing things. It will come up. So we've already done what we're going to do. By the time we're conscious, see, right now, even this speaking that I'm doing right now, I don't actually know the next word that's coming out of my mouth. I have no clue. Consciously, I'm not consciously
Yeah,
selecting the next word that comes out of my mouth. So that word comes out of my mouth. And then you could turn around and say, James, why did you say that? And then I will do a post hoc rationalization. Well, I said that because I wanted to communicate X, Y, and Z or whatever it will be. Do you know the Michael Gazzaniga split brain studies? I think they were back from way in the early 70s.
Yeah, I know some of them. I've looked quite in depth into these. They're interesting.
Right. So one of the classic ones there is they will flash to the right hemisphere, which does not speak.
Mm,
These people who had their corpus callosum, for people watching this,
hmm.
separated for reasons of treating severe epilepsy.
And the
People,
corpus callosum is the piece of the brain that allows for communication between the two hemispheres.
yeah. So they will give an instruction to the right hemisphere, which is essentially the mute hemisphere. It can understand language, but it does not speak. It is not in charge of speaking. Um, they'll flash an instruction like stand up and walk out the room. And then then the right hemisphere will start to initiate that action of standing up. And the left hemisphere is still paying attention to what's going on. So it sort of goes on with it. And then as the test subject is on the way out the room, the tester will stop them and say, excuse me, why are you leaving the room? And what you get is a post hoc explanation because the left hemisphere, which is the one that speaks and is going to answer the question, will say something like, well, I'm thirsty. I just wanted to go get a Coke from the machine. Now, that is not the reason at all. But the left hemisphere sincerely believes it is the reason.
Yeah.
Uh, and you get this a lot. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff in Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, which is a fantastic book. And that really helped me understand that most of my explanations for things are most of the things I believe to be true, I have no evidence for, and are likely as not left hemisphere confabulations, which is what you've got there, a left hemisphere confabulation, a post hoc rationalization.
Here's something that's curious, which I don't remember coming across. But what if they try to do something, imitate something similar, but with the roles reversed? So they would flash an instruction to the left hemisphere and then see if the right hemisphere came up with some sort of a uh, post-event fabulation on why.
Well, the
Because I
trick
can see
is, how does the right hemisphere communicate that?
could do it with their left hand by writing
Okay,
because
I
it's
don't know.
switched around.
I don't know about you. I can't write shit with my left hand.
Well, I
I mean,
mean,
you could
they
possibly give
could
it a go, but um,
you could still kind of write out some response.
yeah,
Um,
there are a lot more. I'm not a scholar in this area at all. So
but that would
like,
be interesting to find out because I wonder if that fabulation, that post-event fabulation, is something to do with specifically the left hemisphere
I, I
because there
I
is.
believe if you take the case that Ian McGilchrist is making in The Master and His Emissary, yes, it is very much a left hemisphere phenomenon,
Yeah.
this confabulation thing. But because the left hemisphere wants neat explanations, that's part of
Hmm.
how it does the world. Nice, neat, reductionist linear explanations. It likes simple cause and effect modeling. I did this because,
Exactly.
this is because. The right hemisphere doesn't really engage with the world in that way.
And it
But
doesn't need that sort of certainty, and it doesn't need
yeah,
that explanation.
yeah. It doesn't even care why anything. That's not how the right hemisphere does things. It's not interested in that why business. So it's an interesting area because people often think this is the thing about hypnosis, for example. People go, well, we're going to like, there's a useful heuristic for thinking about hypnosis, which is that hypnosis is turning doings into happenings, right? So, one of the markers of what somebody might call a hypnotic experience is the sense of something happening without volition. So, you do like a hand levitation, someone's hands floating up. Now, one way of characterizing that is to say, well, that person is lifting their hand, but they have a sense of non volition.
Hmm.
So you could say, really, what you want to do is create that sense of non volition. You're turning a doing into a happening. Or, now that's one way of mapping it. But another way of mapping it is to say you are simply removing the artificial sense of volition. Because
Hmm.
99% of what we
Hmm.
do isn't done anyway. It's like going and getting a can of Coke. That's not really why we were doing it. We're doing what we're doing because that's what we're doing. Now, there might be all manner of things that feed into that, but we're not sitting there thinking consciously, I'm doing this, I'm controlling this.
So something along the lines of getting somebody to see what it's like, to experience what it's like, something happening without actually making up a story or narrative for why they're doing that.
Right. So that part of the brain that would normally be going, well, I'm doing this because, or I can, is just gone. And now things are unfolding from whatever they're unfolding from, the coming together of every relevant factor in that moment. And there's an emergent phenomenon like a hand lifting or a inability to recall a name or something like that.
The the crazier conclusion to draw from this is that we're always there's always a happening then, and there's
Yeah.
never a doing.
Yeah. Well, it's like a lot of the people with the left and right clicker experiment. One of the conclusions, and I can't remember who said this, one of the famous neuroscientists said, basically, we've proved there's no such thing as free will, but there does seem to be such a thing as free won't. Right. Now, what they mean by this is that this I that chooses is apparently better at stopping things and interfering with things than it is at starting things and initiating things.
Hmm.
Right.
That's where the prefrontal cortex would come in, isn't it? Because that's the main part of our brain that has to do with inhibitory
Yeah.
responses.
Yeah. And possibly more the left hemisphere than the right hemisphere, though I'm not, I don't claim to be
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
neuroscientist. But if you've got this idea, like our conscious, like Erickson would call it our conscious mind, a lot of hypnotists would call it your conscious mind. Your conscious mind is good at stopping, inhibiting, interrupting. So, like, there's this classic idea in hypnosis we want to bypass the critical faculty. What does the critical faculty do? Stop, interrupt, cut things up with the sword of reason. Right. So if it's not doing that, and then whatever's unfolding from the system is just unfolding from the system uninhibited, then whatever's going to unfold is whatever's going to unfold. And as long as the left hemisphere doesn't confabulate a story about why and a story of agency, what you end up with is the experience of non-volition.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, most people who are speaking in flow, if you say, did you choose to say those words? They'll say yes without thinking, but they never stopped and made a choice. They just tumbled out
No,
of their
of
mouth.
course not. Yeah. Hold on, we can really go into down a rabbit hole with this. The whole part of the prefrontal cortex, or I think it was, so we have it most developed among mammals, and I think it's ours are significantly more developed than other species, and this is suggested to be one of the main factors that led to our evolution and our domination. So, what are the idea here is that the ability to not do things or to stop things or inhibit things is really what sets us apart and has allowed us to claim dominion.
Right. And if you think about the idea of executive function, right, of top down control, what's that largely about? It's like a managerial thing. Okay. Don't do
Yeah.
that. Don't do that. Even for myself, if I catch myself, I was doing a session the other day for my Nexus group, and somebody had asked a question that related to this. Um, and I use a lot of questions to bust myself out of trances in the moment. But in order to do it, I have to go in, I have to stop. I have to stop allowing and stop flowing. So one of the first things I'll often do is I'll go, okay. Right. Now, when I say to myself, okay, which I say inside of my head, that's almost like going stop.
Mm.
Right. Okay. Left hemisphere executive function. Okay. I say, what is it that's happening here? Now, once I've said that, I've asked that question, I'm actually bringing a kind of left hemisphere inquiry in. I'm observing, I'm pinpointing. I'm no longer in. I've actually stopped free won't. I've stopped the flow. I have moved my mind volitionally instead of just allowing it. So basically, I don't think it's necessarily true to say that the executive functions just stops things, but it stops or changes direction of things. It does not initiate things
Hmm.
necessarily. And now somebody could say, but then if you stop and you send in a different direction, didn't you initiate that? Maybe. Like there's a whole, I don't know how far down that rabbit hole we could even possibly start to go with that before we find ourselves in the house of mirrors. Um, but it does seem that there's some truth to that. If we go, okay, it's like if you're driving, right? You can drive on autopilot totally.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
then maybe certain traffic conditions come in, you've been chatting to your passenger and you're just driving and suddenly like you're at a really difficult junction or intersection. There's cars coming everywhere. You don't know it. Am I in the right lane? Somebody's trying to cut across there. And
And you become
suddenly,
aware of everything.
yeah, suddenly you go,
You're
hang on.
conscious.
Let me just get through this junction. Then and now you're bringing a much higher level of consciousness to it
Mm.
because now the automated flow needs some additional modification, needs some additional, not overriding. You still need to be able to work with your ingrained driving instincts and skills and all of this kind of thing, but a little bit more awareness to a different level of functioning to be able to intervene, maybe stop you pulling across in front of that other car or whatever it will be. So that said, I'm just thinking about an opposite example of this. I was talking to somebody yesterday. I was working with a client yesterday, and I was telling a story of an occasion many years ago, about 20 years ago, where when I was training as an osteopath, I was driving back after a long day at the teaching clinic on the A1 in Hertfordshire, driving from Boreham Wood to Letchworth, and I was really tired. And the traffic was pretty heavy, but it was still flowing quite fast. And I saw about 3 cars up ahead. I saw some dust on the central reservation. I was in the fast lane. I saw some dust in the central reservation as somebody veered off and almost hit the central barrier.
Hmm.
And I was so distracted by this because this was like 3 or 4 cars up ahead. And I was looking past the car in front that I didn't see that the car in front had like hugely overreacted and hit their brakes really suddenly.
Hmm.
And by the time I realized they hit their brakes and I hit my brakes, it was really clear that I was not going to stop in time. And so instinctively, I swerved into the middle lane. Now, there could have been somebody coming up the inside, but fortunately there wasn't. So I swerved into the middle lane. I missed the back of this, but the swerve put me into a spin. And I went into a
Hmm.
spin. I spun partly past the car in front and then hit the passenger side um, door pillar between the front and the back doors of the car. Smashed it in. That car went on, hit the central reservation. I stopped spinning, facing the wrong way on the A1M with traffic coming towards me, and I'm in the middle lane, facing the wrong direction, and these cars coming towards me. Just thinking, oh shit. Now, the very next thing I remember was being on the hard shoulder facing the right way
In the car?
in the car. So and literally, it was almost as if some aliens had come and picked me up, turned me around, and put me down, and then erased that, done the Men in Black thing and erased that bit of memory or something like that. And this was almost immediate. It wasn't like when I
Will
thought
Smith
about it
before he got
later.
slapped.
Yeah, before he got slapped, pre-slap Will Smith. Um, well, he didn't get slapped, pre-slapping Will Smith.
Oh
So
yeah, pre-slapping, yeah.
yeah, he needed that thing to
He
erase the
needed it,
memory of Chris Rock
yeah.
and the entire
And everybody
audience.
on stage.
Yeah, that would have been handy. But the crazy thing is, it's like what took over there? Why and why? Why did my brain decide that my conscious functioning, my whatever it is, my intentionality, my sense of self, everything go away for a bit? I have no clue. But it's an interesting thing because a whole part of my everyday functioning disappeared to the point I had no consciousness of what happened. But something took over that did a good job of getting me out of the middle lane facing the wrong way, off the road on the hard shoulder facing the right way.
I can think of an explanation, although I don't know how accurate this is. Probably what would have happened is your adrenaline would have been rushing already, and then that further spike that would have occurred from seeing the oncoming traffic,
Hmm.
freaking out, adrenaline spiking more. That, from what I know, cuts off blood circulation to the PFC, prefrontal cortex, and maybe completely shut down a lot of your left hemisphere, put you into complete autopilot, and that's how you just woke up into something in another
Right.
event.
Well, all I know is I handled the situation like a boss, but I wasn't there. So, like, what does that make me then? So, I don't know. Um, there I was on the thing, and then I got out the 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 girl in the car, or the lady in the car. I should probably say it's probably considered condescending to call her a girl, but she was quite young. Um, and she got out. She was crying, and I felt like a real shitbag for having.
Is this the one in front of you that you hit?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She was in it. She was in a right state. Very upset by it. So I felt terrible for that. Even though I do think she overreacted somewhat on those breaks. But I was tired, and that is not a good way to drive after a hard
What
day.
happened? What happened here with the car insurance? Did it go up after that?
Probably. I mean, oh, absolutely, definitely. Yeah. But I mean, this is 20 years ago, so I don't remember the specifics of the insurance, but it was definitely my fault that was taken as,
Yeah,
um, and I wouldn't argue that. Although another occasion when I was almost stationary, a motorcyclist rode into me and then claimed that I'd overtaken them and pulled across, which was a complete lie. And the insurance company paid out for them. And I was extremely annoyed about that.
fucking hell.
Um, it was quite demonstrable that I hadn't done that kind of thing. The officers who attended the scene at the time measured everything and all of this, and measured his skid marks where he tried to stop and everything. And if I'd have been
And
at fault in any way, I would have got arrested for driving
the
for
insurance
dangerous
company
driving.
still took their side.
Yeah, still just paid out for them. That was direct line insurance. I'd never insured with them again for
Hmm.
that reason. I don't know why they did, but they just paid out without any dispute. But that's got nothing to do with hypnosis and hypnotic communication. Not that last bit. It's just me
Or name
getting into.
amnesia.
Oh, name amnesia. I thought you'd forgotten.
No.
All right, so name amnesia. So I went through this phase of playing around with name amnesia, and I'd got this idea from David Ellman, who's famous for the Ellman induction and has
Hmm.
that classic book, Hypnotherapy, green hardback cover. And if I remember this right now, I want to acknowledge the reconstructive nature of memory. This is a long time ago now, so I can't. Whatever I say is in this book. I hope is in this book, and I haven't just made it up and confabulated it. But as I remember, like there was a bit in there where Ellman started just doing these pattern interrupts and things, and he would just be talking to somebody normally, and then he'd suddenly go, "Oh," and then kind of grab them on the shoulder. When they had that shock, he'd say, "The strangest thing has just happened," and they go, "What?" He'd go, "Your name has disappeared entirely from your head. You don't know your own name. It's gone now. Try and say it. It's gone." Right? This is what he would do, and he said he just did it. I think he said it. He did it as an experiment. This is what gave me the idea of doing a similar sort of thing as an experiment. So I started playing around with doing this and just seeing what I could get in terms of amnesias happening. And there's a couple of other methods I played. Well, there's another main method I played around with, which was an anchoring method, which was to ask a confusing question. And the confusing
Hmm.
question that was going around, and this was something that was going around the street hypnosis scene at the time, actually comes, I think, from Tad James, NLP. And it's the question, what is it that you're not thinking about right now? Right. So the trick is you ask that question, what is it that you're not thinking about right now? And then you anchor their confusion,
Hmm.
right?
How
And
how
then
would you anchor it?
Well, like when I used to do this, I used to just anchor it with a touch on the shoulder, like classic NLP anchoring,
Mhm.
right? Though you probably don't need to do it. You could anchor it visually, or you could probably just anchor it with your facial expression as you ask.
Or tone or something.
Tone, facial expression. Um, but you can do it like this with a tap on the shoulder. So this is how I used to do it. What is it that you're not thinking about right now? That's right. Let me ask you a second question. When was the last time you forgot your own name? Now, what's your name? Try to say it and fire the anchor off. Right. So I messed around with these two techniques, and I can't say that I found one to be especially more effective than the other.
Mhm.
They were hit and miss. What I did pick up from doing this, doing these eyes open name amnesias, is, and I've mentioned this elsewhere, probably maybe even in the last in the podcast that we were talking about this before. But what I did notice is that people would almost always get some kind of initial disruption to their
Mhm.
automatic cognitive flow. So automatically you ask somebody their name, what's your name? They'll go, Bob, assuming their name's Bob. They will go, Bob. They won't even think,
Yeah.
they won't think twice about it, right? It just boom. And if you said, why did you say that? They'd come up with a backwards rationalization because that's my name. They could easily say because you asked me or because whatever, but they'll say something, but that's irrelevant, right? So people would naturally say the name. What I found is with both the anchoring technique and the pattern interrupt technique, there would always be a window of confusion or difficulty getting the name, and it might last from like half a second to a few seconds, but there was always something.
Mhm.
You'd always get and there would always be some eye accessing and a bit of
Mhm.
right? So I was kind of like, well, this is an interesting thing to know.
Could you prolong this if you interrupted the eye accessing?
Yes, yes, exactly, which is exactly what I started to do. And that's why if you see me do name amnesias, I often do it. And when they go to eye access off, I go, look at me. And I bring their eyes right back to me. It's one of the very few times I would directly look somebody in the eye when I'm doing play hypnosis, stuff like that. Normally, I want to
Mhm.
get out of the way of, I don't want to
Their
pull them
imagination, the
into,
creative faculty.
yeah, I don't want to pull them into, normally when you do eye contact, it pulls people into a social zone.
Mhm. Where
Um,
they need to set those processes up for interacting and
yeah, yeah. So I normally avoid it because I don't want them in
Mhm.
a social zone. I don't want them being in the frame of, oh, I'm having a conversation with this guy. So
Yeah.
I want them to go to a different space. Now, the difference here is I go, look at me. Now, this is not a conversational eye contact. It's different. I do this. I actually got this from a guy called Chris Hackney, funnily enough, who was not a hypnotist.
Mhm.
Um, this look at
What,
me business.
the this eye looking thing?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I used to know this guy called Chris Hackney years ago when I was a teenager. And Chris was uh he's kind of quite charismatic in a weird way, but he was narcissistic as anything, and he loved
Am
to
I
lord it
editing
over.
this out, or is
No,
this
no, no.
okay to
You
say?
can chug this in if Chris is listening. Chris, um, yeah, it'd be interesting to see Chris. So Chris used to sit in the Red Heart in Hitchin, and in the bottom bar there was a big corner table, and Chris would love to sit right in the corner of the table with the table there, and he would have like his acolytes around him, and he would sit there almost like Jabba the Hutt on the throne, and he'd be in the middle. He'd drink whiskey, and he'd be like, and he was always he'd go, ah, you getting him in, you getting him in. Look at me. He'd do this thing. He'd go, you getting him in, and if you conceded to get him a drink, he'd go, oh, you're my little soldier, you're my little soldier. He was a very kind of patronizing like this. So I wasn't super good friends with Chris, and I wasn't in his little accolade group, but I did know some people who were. And he would pull
What
this.
was it about hypnosis or
No, it
mentalism
was
or
nothing to do with hypnosis. This is just a guy that would drink in a pub where people drank and drank hard,
what the fuck?
right? But he would have this little cult, this crew around him of people that would somehow look up to him because he acted like the leader, the boss, the big man, and people just kind of fell in line. But he used to do this thing when people were not paying attention to him. He'd be there drunk as anything with a whiskey, and he'd say something, and if somebody didn't respond immediately, he'd go, "Look at me, look at me, look at me. You getting him in? Yeah, you're my little soldier." So he used to do this, and it would, would totally get people running around. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm going to do the Chris Hackney thing, but when I started to do the look at me, there was something of Chris Hackney that got channeled this way, that he would just look at people dead on, like, you're going to do what you tell me. So I guess I sort of unconsciously modeled that Chris Hackney thing, and I brought it into doing my name amnesia to interrupt people's eye accessing cues. So like, that's the thing I would say to people: if you're developing yourself as a hypnotist, ultimately you're going to develop your own style. But you can model all sorts of things from all sorts of places. You don't have to just model other hypnotists and these sorts of things. Like, a lot of what influences me in my more dynamic form of hypnosis, if I'm doing co-creative hypnosis, psychoactive facilitation, a lot of that comes from martial arts, like principles and ideas I learned from martial arts. Even the way, if I'm moving in relation to somebody, a lot of that comes from martial arts. So you can draw all sorts of stuff into your own unique hypnosis blend. And part of that little bit of Chris Hackney just came through. I didn't consciously choose it, interestingly enough. It just kind of popped through. But but that's exactly the point that you're talking about. It disrupting you can prolong the moment.
Yeah.
And for me, my Hackney shtick, Chris Hackney shtick, that helped me prolong the moment there. So yeah, there's a few. So some people know my submodalities name amnesia piece, and I saw a hypnotist doing something very similar that I suspect may have been influenced by my submodalities on a street
Oh,
hypnotist.
are
I
you
think
talking about Max Major?
it could be. I don't know. I saw
Made
the
the
guy.
name go up in the air.
Yeah, I liked how he did it. Right. If
Yeah.
he took inspiration, maybe it's a complete separate innovation. I suspect it's an evolution of my submodalities name amnesia. But that said, I'm going to give him full kudos because I think he did it in an absolutely beautiful way. And I think he had a really good, because I think I said to you, I really like the way this guy works. And you were like, really? What's so great? For me, his aesthetics were really good. What I mean by that, nobody thinks about this when they think about hypnosis. They don't think about aesthetics. I think aesthetics are really important. Let me explain why. Aesthetics, I don't just
Wait,
mean visuals.
hold up. Is this another topic?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. All right. All right. I'm not going to talk about aesthetics. Let's open that loop and
No,
let's
but
let
I am
let the
curious.
loop
Let's
hang
talk
there.
about it next.
Okay. Let me just close this one on the submodalities name amnesia. So, and this actually relates to what I was saying earlier about half of NLP or neurolinguistics being epistemology, i.e., the sense that you're
Mm.
leading somebody into, the rendering of the moment that you're drawing them into. The other half being cybernetic communication. So I'm always communicating cybernetically. That means there's a feedback loop between me and the person I'm working with, and it's a co-creative feedback loop. I respond in real time. I was teaching this a couple of weekends ago in a live workshop, and one guy said, "Are you fine slicing your calibrations that much?" I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "That must be exhausting for you." I'm like, "Well, actually, it is." Um, this is one of the reasons why, I do find the way that I facilitate stuff to be very kind of intensive for me, because I am super, super on it when I'm doing a real facilitation. I'm really fine slicing my calibrations and co-creating with every slight adjustment in the moment.
To clarify here, the two categories you're talking about here are the frame, which is the epistemology aspect, so the frame that or the sense that you're providing people to make.
Yes.
And then the
Yeah.
other part is the communication skill, which is the
Yeah. It's the skill of communication and the organization of reality that you are inviting somebody into through that communication, or nudging them into, or leading them into, or whatever it would be. So those are the two sides, and that skill is based in a feedback loop of communication and response, and that's two
yeah.
ways. Not I communicate, they respond. I communicate, they communicate, I communicate, they communicate. There's, even to call it a loop is a simplification. So I did this with this guy once, and I did one of the other methods, maybe the anchoring method, maybe the abrupt interrupt method. Um, and I said, funny things just happened. Your name's gone, or whatever. It's just disappeared completely, and gave that suggestion, and looked at him, and he went, Phil. Let's just say his name was Phil, and he kind of got it back, and I went, Phil, that's right. And I said, what was that like? Right. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, if you do these sorts of things, don't think if you got a second or 3 seconds of interruption of their name, don't think, oh, it didn't work. Always ask the person, what was that like? And you'll get, even if it was just a half-second delay, a lot of people go, oh, it's really weird. For a moment, I couldn't get it. So you actually just scored a win up on the board, even if
Yeah,
you think
yeah.
that wasn't what I was going for. I wanted to get like a full, really robust amnesia. Always check back in. What was that like? And then they say, well, it was really weird. Like for a moment there, I couldn't get my name. And you go, yeah, weird, right? Because you know your name, second nature. That's sense making around that moment. You mark out like the strangeness of that moment. So I said this to this guy. I said, what was that like? And he's like, oh, it was weird. It was just completely gone for a moment. And then it just kind of came back in at me. Right. And he did this. It came back in at me.
Did you pick it up and throw it away?
Yes, is exactly what I did because he showed me exactly where it came back in. So I gestured to him. I said, so it came back in at you, and pointed along the trajectory and nodded. And he went, yeah. And I said, and right there. So if I were to take it right out again and send it right back out, and I just did this thing, send it out past the ceiling, out past the sky, out past the stars. So it's gone now. And you look at me and it's gone. What's that like now? It's gone completely. And you look at me and you try and say it. Complete, utter, robust amnesia. I'm like, oh, huh, interesting. So what I started to do after that
Uh,
point,
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but now you say, and there's nothing there.
yes,
Is that the
I
preferred one now?
I do. You're
And there's nothing there now.
you're helping me reconnect because there was a later evolution after this point. Um, yeah, and I've spoken about this explicitly before, and I'm trying to remember speaking about it explicitly before. So I used to go, what's it like when you try and say your name and it's gone, right? It has gone. The verb to go, right? That's a verb, right? What's it like when you try and say your name and it's gone? We're in the realm of verbs.
Hmm.
Now, the thing about verbs is they're process terms. Now, you could say, well, it's gone, it's past tense, but what goes around comes around, this kind of thing. And at some point, and I can't remember why, I was playing with some other stuff. I think I was playing with like overdurfy and attention shifting coaching and this kind of thing. And he's got this thing about space, time, matter, and energy. It's a little bit of a convoluted thing. Um, but starting to notice that you can turn things into process and then back into uh, nouns again. You can turn things as a verb back into nouns again. And that often, if you turn a noun into a verb, move it, and then re solidify it in a noun, then that can create a really nice effect. And I started playing with this in change work and getting some interesting things happening in change work. And then I realized that I could do this with the name amnesia. So instead of saying, what happens when you try and say a name and it's gone, I'll say, so it's gone and there's nothing where your name was. Now we've moved from the verb thing um,
Hmm.
back into the realm of the noun,
Hmm.
right? So it's there's a thing to focus on, and that thing is a thing called no thing, nothing. Right. So what happens when your name is gone and there's nothing where your name was? Try and see your name when there's nothing where that name was. Nothing. Right. So that's how I changed the suggestion sequence to get people to focus on a concept. Absolutely. and that concept is abstract, it's called nothing, right? That's what I want them focusing on, nothing.
Hmm.
So I'll emphasize it in an analog market as well. What happens when you try and say that name and there's nothing where that name was? Nothing. Try and say it and there's nothing. So that's how I changed that suggestion sequence. And I believe that it
Does it
increased the robustness of the amnesia.
does it also work, or does it help the fact that you're kind of creating a metaphor for the concept, because you're almost creating, you're almost fleshing it out, fleshing the idea that there's a space for the name uh, to encapsulate it,
Yeah.
and now in that space there's nothing there. Is the idea of making concepts or ideas, turning them into a metaphor or something tangible, is that part of it? Why
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
can utilize it
Look,
better?
this is the point about thinking in terms of process. This is how this kind of hypnosis is different from Ericksonian hypnosis. Ericksonian hypnosis is just float and drift, and I'll just drop suggestions in this loose form way, and your mind can create them in any way it chooses. What I'm talking about here is really precisely shaping sense making and experience. So, the use of language and communication, this is my hypnosis definition, to direct attention, lead cognition, and seed ideas. We're not just leading cognition, we're structuring cognition. We're offering the metaphors, we're offering the organizations of reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, if I start a
Yeah.
name amnesia by saying, "What's your name?" They say, "Phil." I say, "So, when your name's Phil, how do you know?" Right? I used to say that. People would say things like, "Well, it's the name I've always had," or something like that. So I'll go, I changed that to, "So when your name's Phil, whereabouts is that name? Is it in your head? Is it in your body?" Now, when I do that, I go, "Whereabouts is that name? Is it in your head? Is it in your body?"
You're
I,
suggesting for them to choose head.
I actually don't care where they choose. But what they're buying into is that the name has a location, that it resides somewhere, right? "What's your name?" "My name is Phil." "When your name is Phil," which it is, yes, pace. "Whereabouts is that name? Is it in your head? Is it in your body? Whereabouts?" And they go, um, "It's in my head." Now, if somebody goes, "Well, in my head, I suppose." They're not really engaging in that
Mm.
psychoactive way. So
Hmm.
that's a red flag under the hypnosis without trance approach, right? But if um, they go, "Well, in my head, I guess," right? If they do that, a bit of eye accessing, we know there's something, we know they're engaging with the organization of reality. So I'm going to go in your head, go, "Yeah, I guess so." "Whereabouts in your head?" Now, as soon as they do this, boom, they're in,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? They don't
Because
even,
they've just fallen into this into the structure of reality you're providing, and they're buying
yes,
into it.
they're engaging with it. They're going, they're doing it fully 100%. This going, kind of up here, right? They're in it. It's already happening. You know, this is green flags, green flags, green flags. Totally different from like, well, I don't know, just somewhere in my head. That wouldn't be them really
Yeah.
engaging with it. They're doing their own thing. So it's like, they go go up here, right? And I'll point to it and go, and they go, "Yes." Okay, we're game on at this point.
Confirm now. Yeah. They've just
Now,
confirmed that. Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now there's a little thing that I'd also played around with for a while where I could go, so noticing just there, if we were to move it over to here, right? And I would just go and move it over to the other side of the head. That's pretty different, right?
Oh, further getting them to further buy into the fact that there's a
Yes.
difference here.
Yeah. So I moved the name. I go, "If we were moved over here, that's pretty different, right?" And they go, uh, "Yeah." And then I go, almost like it isn't even the same thing, right? And they'll go, and I'll go, "So when it isn't the same thing, what happens when you try and say a name that isn't the same thing anymore?" Right? Hmm. There it goes. If they've bought into that whole thing, they are now fully in this new organization of reality, which utterly scuppers the access to their name, providing they remain in that organization of reality,
That's cool. Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh. Have
So
you played around with like taking it from their head, moving it down into their body,
you
or even
can,
outside
like,
the body?
this is the thing. Once you start getting the principles of this, you can then you're not bound to. So the reason I started moving it from like one side of the head to the other, or I'm just giving that as an example, or down into the base of your neck, or into your earlobe, or whatever it will be. Once once you can play with it any way you like. You're not bound. The original thing I did, take it out, send it up there. Um, I thought, well, I did it that way quite a few times, but then I'm like, well, what if we move it in different ways? How many different ways can we move it? And that's why I like this guy whose name who's that I've forgotten again, who took it out and did this wonderful thing where he sort of, with this flourish, if I'm remembering rightly, he kind of, and he watches it go up. It's beautifully done. He watches it go up and he watches them watch it go up too. That's all green flags. That is a beautiful
Hmm.
bit of business because you get a really good calibration point to see
Hmm.
that they're
Hmm.
buying into that organization of reality because you get to watch it go up and you get to watch them watch it go up. Now, when you see that kind of stuff, to me, so going back to the hypnosis without trance approach, and people, if they're interested and are watching this, they can buy my book from Amazon. Hypnosis without trance, how hypnosis really works. I will shamelessly plug, but yeah, like this is how it works. In that system, I call it red flags and green flags. So you're always looking for green flags that show you that yes, this person is engaged. They're buying into this reality. They're living into it right now. Red flags are things that suggest they're not. They're rejecting it. And if you get a good eye for the red flags and green flags, by the time you give any suggestion, like go ahead, try and say that name, and it's and there's nothing what that name was, you already know it's going to take because you already know
Yeah.
they're fully in the reality. There's no chance taken at that point.
Let's get into aesthetics. Let's close this loop
Okay.
and get into aesthetics.
All right. Yeah. End of this podcast episode. Um, and oh yeah, I'll just say before we close the podcast episode, anyone watching this, if on the platform you're watching it on, you can rate and review, and you like it, please rate and review and like it. We would be most appreciative.
Absolutely. And provide any feedback if you have anything
Yeah, all
or
of that too. Or
questions.
questions.
Or
Yeah, we like
questions. Yeah.
questions too. Questions too. All right, so we're going to do the next episode now.
Absolutely. Let's do it. I'll leave